Powered by the Montana Television Network. This is the 10 o'clock news on Q2, Montana's news leader.
Good evening and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Jay Kohn. Janelle is off tonight. Some anxious moments in West Billings this evening as officers surrounded a home as part of an ongoing investigation. Just minutes ago, the standoff came to a peaceful end, and we can tell you that one man is now in custody. It all started shortly after 6 o'clock this evening when a man barricaded himself inside a home in the 2200 block of Avenue B. That led to a standoff with police and a local SWAT team. Then around 8 o'clock tonight, people reported hearing a flashbang grenade on the block near Rose Park. Then an officer was heard calling through a bullhorn for a person inside to come out peacefully. Just after 9 p.m., that man was arrested without incident. And just prior to that, police had parked 2 patrol cars and an unmarked car directly in front of the house in question. Officers, including one with a canine dog, were walking away from the home. Officer Tom Keatley tells MTN an ongoing investigation of a suspect in a crime led police to this home tonight. North of Boston tonight, at least one person is dead and thousands of residents have been forced to evacuate their homes. Authorities say a natural gas leak caused more than 3 dozen homes to burst into flames, and there's concern that more homes could be at risk. Residents are being asked to keep their distance. Kenneth Craig has the latest for us.
Firefighters high above the ground attempted to douse this home engulfed in flames. It's just one of dozens to catch fire across 3 towns north of Boston.
I've been in the fire service for almost 39 years, and I've never seen anything like this. It looked like Armageddon. It really did.
An apparent explosion blew the walls off of this house and cracked the side of the home in 2.
It is unsettling, to say the least.
Authorities blame the fire on gas lines that became overpressurized. One man said the furnace in his basement burst into flames. Crews scrambled to battle all the different fires, which would hit one home and then another several blocks away.
It's like it's one house right here, it's another house down the street.
It's very strange.
As day turned to night, firefighters were able to get the flames under control.
Residents in this neighborhood told me around 5 o'clock they heard and felt a loud explosion, and then minutes later saw fire trucks and first responders flooding their streets.
Just heard like a massive explosion. It just shook the house. So at that point, we got out of the house.
Entire neighborhoods were evacuated with fears any house could be next. Crews worked to depressurize the gas lines so people could return to their homes.
Trust us when we tell you, if you stay in your home, you're going to be at risk.
Power was shut down in hopes of preventing another fire, leaving thousands in the dark. The FBI is investigating, along with state and local authorities. Kenneth Craig, CBS News, North Andover, Massachusetts.
Elsewhere on the national scene tonight, the days of waiting for Hurricane Florence are over. Its outer bands are already being felt in the southeastern U.S., where this monster storm is due to make landfall in the coming hours. Hurricane Florence reached a Category 4 earlier this week, but it's since been downgraded as its wind speeds have weakened. That, however, does not mean that Florence will be any less catastrophic. Coastal states are bracing for historic rain, flooding, and even landslides. We're told at least 10 million people are currently in the storm's crosshairs as it moves inland. Turning to our weather here in the Big Sky State, Bob McGuire, as we all know, storms can be unpredictable, but where do you think it's heading?
Well, it seems to be heading right for Wilmington, North Carolina. Right now, the outer bands are moving onshore. You can see it there, but it really doesn't make landfall until the first eye wall gets in there. So that's going to be probably sometime tomorrow morning. It's now been downgraded to a Category 1. It's got 90-mile-per-hour winds, but part of the reason it's been downgraded, the actual size of all the rain revolving around it has actually increased. You'll notice here it's almost 270 miles wide, so it's a very big storm, and it continues to rake its way up across most of North Carolina. It is forecast to go to Charleston, South Carolina, before it starts turning north again, and eventually this thing will wind up in another week or so up around New York City and then into Newfoundland, Canada. We'll have more in our forecast. Does look a little quieter than that in a few more minutes, Jay.
All right, thank you, Bob. Near the small community of Clarkston, Montana, some 10 structures, including 3 homes, have been destroyed in this week's Horseshoe wildfire. MTN's Mallory Peebles takes us to the fire lines tonight for an up-close look.
This is the worst of it, a home, a complete loss. But just 100 yards away, there's a structure that was saved, proof that a fire's path is anything but predictable. Buckets of water sit next to a charred hose. A melted basketball hoop hangs, and a foundation sits with nothing above.
I'm sure there was a fairly large ember shower that was being casted down onto this house.
When you look back at the peak of the Horseshoe Fire, you can see its fury. Flames reached 50 feet in length, according to officials. With wind and dry heat, conditions were perfect for it to spread quickly. And it did. More than 1,300 acres, most within the first few hours. In total, 10 buildings were lost, including 3 homes, at least.
There may be other structure remains there, but we cannot identify what they are.
Gallatin County Sheriff's Office is working to get a final count on what's been lost, and fire crews continue to work on containment.
Basically doing what we call gridding, looking for hot spots along the edge. We start on the outside edge of the fire and then we work our way in.
Weather conditions have improved, but the ground is still dry and juniper trees are trapping heat. Even without high-stretching flames, the fire is holding on.
To be honest, we are still kind of in that fire season. We're in the middle of September, but it's dry. The weather hasn't really decided whether it wants to turn to fall or stay summer.
With so much still at risk, crews don't plan to leave anytime soon. People are able to return to their homes or what's left to begin salvage and recovery. Reporting from Clarkston, I'm Mallory Peebles with MTN News.
Thank you, Mallory. Here in Billings today, men in brightly colored fluorescent shirts were hanging off the rim rocks this morning, working to try to prevent even more rock slabs from falling in the future. Watch here as this is a 200-ton boulder crashing down just above Mountain View Boulevard. Terracon consultants have been hired by the city to do preventative work, try to ensure that more rim chunks don't fall into this area in the future. But in order to do that, they had to force 2 giant boulders off of the rim wall this morning. How do they do that? Well, using what are basically inflatable pillows.
If it's in a position where you can, go ahead and push the rock off, make it fall, and then rather than wait for it to happen at some odd time and possibly injure somebody or damage some property.
Now, you may recall this past June when a large rock slide damaged a Billings garage and crushed a vehicle down on Mountain View Boulevard. Usually crews use dynamite to bring the rocks down, but because of the close proximity of homes, Terracon has opted for the inflatable pillow technology, which they say prevents the smaller rocks from shooting out. The work done at the Moss Mansion during the United Way's Day of Caring is critical for the upkeep of that historic Billings home. This year, though, the big project is not maintenance related at all. Q2's Connor Pregitzer shows us.
The annual United Way Day of Caring means a much-needed tree trimming for the 100-year-old cottonwoods of Moss Mansion. Northwestern Energy is donating the manpower, a gift worth around $20,000, and a necessary service that the mansion could not otherwise afford. But this year's project came with a sticky conservational complication.
What started off here as United Way Day of Caring, some simple tree clearing work to benefit the Moss Mansion, has turned into a major operation. This tree behind me has a beehive in it that spans some 10 feet of the tree that they're trying to save here at the Moss Mansion. As we'll see in a few minutes, they're going to end up having to take the entire tree down to do it.
Local beekeeper Chuck Bushy was called in to deal with the swarming mass of bees that inhabited this particular tree.
What we're hoping to do is to be able to save this hive. I'm going to be looking very intently to find the queen bee, who is somewhere inside, hiding amongst all the thousands of other bees. And once I find her and separate her from the others, I'll have a special box that I'll put her in. And then the other bees will get her scent and they will migrate to that box. So what I'll be doing is reaching in and extracting by arm whatever I can reach.
The sheer size of the hive meant it was a much bigger job than Chuck had anticipated. However, just a little later in the afternoon, Chuck was able to rescue the queen and transport the hive. In Billings, Connor Pregitzer, MTN News.
And Connor tells us if anyone would like the non-bee infested wood from that tree trimming today for possible use as firewood, it's available for pickup over at the Moss Mansion. Millions of people will pass through the gates of Yellowstone National Park this year. Each of them will take a memory home with them. But unfortunately, they'll also be leaving something behind in the park. MTN's Chet Lehman tonight reports on the human impact on Yellowstone.
Yellowstone National Park is a giant lab. Research ongoing right now, some of that research being presented over the next few days here in Big Sky. They've divided the topics into 3 parts: the social science track, the natural science track, and the community and skills building. All of that focus on tracking the human footprint. What is our impact on the greater Yellowstone ecosystem?
And that research is varied as the park itself. One study looking at the impact of wildlife jams on visitors. Turns out, some of us aren't following the rules.
And we found that the closest approach distance of a visitor to a bear was less than 5 meters. So I had a laser rangefinder that I used from a safe distance. Well, I'm also calling dispatch saying we need to get a wildlife brigade crew in here because these people are really close to bears right now.
That study conducted in Grand Teton National Park. In Yellowstone, topics run the gambit, including looking at visitors' attitudes towards recycling. The National Park Service has to deal with garbage, a lot of garbage.
Here, over 100 million pounds of trash are generated in national parks through park operations, park visitors, concessions, and so forth, a variety of sources. And we're talking about a lot of waste and recyclable material generated in the park.
In Yellowstone, much of the waste is brought in by visitors, and when given a chance, they are by and large doing a good job of using recycling receptacles.
The overall topic for the 14th Biennial Scientific Conference on the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem is tracking the human footprint. One of the Wednesday morning sessions actually looks at the footprint impact, taking a look at the trails in Yellowstone National Park and how people are using them or abusing them.
You see the circle, and then you see the arterials coming off for the park roads. Like, that's where you see a lot of those polygons and those, spaghetti squiggles of the impacts.
Those impacts amount to nearly 53 miles of visitor-created trails in Yellowstone National Park. In Big Sky, Chet Lehman, MTN News.
Very interesting. Thank you, Chet. Here in Billings this evening, some 300 people crowded into the Billings Clinic Commons to honor the late Dr. Nick Wolter. The hospital's former CEO passed away last weekend. Wolter spent 20 years as the clinic's CEO, and colleagues from near and far were on hand tonight to reflect on his life and legacy during the ceremony. Wolter was 70 years old. He is survived by 4 children and 9 grandchildren. Still ahead on tonight's 10 o'clock news, is the Initiative 185 campaign blowing smoke or perhaps gaining steam? Tonight we look at both sides of the issue. And in sports, reigning world champion Jess Lockwood could miss the rest of the season, including the World Finals. Scott Breen tells us why coming up.
You're watching MTN News with Jay Kohn and Janelle Slade. Storm Tracker weather with Bob McGuire. And sports with Scott Breen. This is the 10 o'clock news on Q2, Montana's news leader.